Hello again, welcome back. We're going to continue discussing CSS, and today we're going to talk about custom properties again, and then we're going to compare them with the variables in Sass, and then we're going to talk about Sass also in the next video, okay? So here I have an example that's kind of, maybe something we've done before in class, but I put a new twist on it, okay? So here are some buttons that I have, and you can see they each have a different color arrangement, and but they all share the same style, right? They have a hover, right? And what's interesting about this is that the base button looks like this when I write it in HTML, and it produces the blue button with the white text, right, with the hover, okay? When I want to change the color, right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a color variable. So I have a CSS custom property here, and what I did was I just assigned it a new value. So each of the buttons here has its own color FG for foreground and color BG for background. Okay, so they each have a foreground color and a background color. And you can assign, the way that I've arranged it here is allows you to assign a new color value to the foreground color property or the background color property, and then the button uses it in its in its hover mode or in its regular display. And also there's an active mode, so if you click on it, it goes back to the original one. Okay? So I think that this is like a really interesting idea, and it kind of points out the subtle power of CSS custom properties. Okay, so you can see here the basic button is, I just say button and I get a button. If I say button and then I add the style prop, I can define the custom property and then give it a new color. So in this case, the foreground color is black, right? And oops, I changed that. Let me undo that there, right? And then on this one, you can see I set the background color and I set it to a green, right? So now I get the green background here. And then on this one, I set the background color to be red because I wanted to make a warning button, okay? And in some cases, you may already have a color that's in a variable that you know that you want to use, and that variable already exists. So in the last example, this purple button right here, I have a variable called color A, and I'm using that color here as the background color for the button. Okay, so let's build this example from scratch, right? So I'm going to start over again here. I've got all my code up here for the button. I'm going to just delete everything here in my style sheet, right? And then I'm going to delete all of these things too, right? So I just have a, a single button, right, that just says hello, and then I have my style tag up here, right? So the style tag is kind of separate. I have an HTML document, but the style tag is separate from everything else. Okay, so oops. So to get started here, let's style the button. So I'm going to do a lot of the things we did earlier. I'm going to just define the button tag and then give it some padding. And maybe I'll do 1 rem of padding. And to me, this always seems like a little wider on the top and bottom than on the left and right. So I think I'm going to change this to 0.5 rems on the top and bottom, and 0.75 rems on the left and right. And I feel that kind of gives me like a nice proportion there. So I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to set some styles for the border too. So let's do the border radius of, and we'll put this in like half a rem maybe, right? And that way if we use rems, then if there is a change in the font size, then our, the border radius will match it, right? Okay, and what else are we going to do? Let's set the border style to be solid, and then let's set the, what are we going to do here? let's say, the font size on the button is always a little smaller than 1 rem. So like the default button here is going to be this big, and I find that text to be a little small. So I'm going to say font size of 1 rem. Okay, and then that'll be a little bit bigger. It'll just be the base font size, right? I mean, you can make it smaller if you want or larger. So the last step here is to set the colors, and I'll need a foreground color. That'll be the color of the text. I'll need a border color, and then I'll need a background color. Okay, I'm going to use the foreground and border color as the color of the text and the border, and then I'm going to use the background color as the background color for the button itself. So I'll need 2 colors for my button. And if you make a more complex button, you may need another color, right? And the way that I'm going to handle the color is I'm going to make a variable foreground color. And let's say the foreground color, I want it to be white. And then I'll make a background color. So I'm going to say background color, and we can make this to be, how about we'll make it blue. That's not like a great color, but I'm going to change it, right? So I'm going to go in here into the color picker, and let's make it kind of like a different shade of blue. Maybe like that looks okay, right? And I kind of like sticking with the hex colors, so I'm going to stick with the hex color here, right? Okay, so now that I've got these 2 variables here, notice we're defining these 2 variables inside the button. So every button or everything that meets this description of this selector is going to get these variables, right? It'll share them, okay? So let's use those right now. I'm going to go to my border here and set the border color to the foreground color. So we'll use var -- color, and we'll choose foreground. Okay, now it doesn't show anything here because it's the same as the background, but that's all right. And then we'll set the background color to be var, and we'll do -- color background, right? So there's our blue. And now let's set the font color, which is just color, and we'll set this to be var, and we'll do it as color foreground, right? Okay, great. So there's our button, right? I'm going to zoom in on this a little bit, right? So that's looking pretty good. Let's set a hover style now. And this is where these custom properties are going to really save us some time and effort and make our life easy. So I'm going to add a button : hover selector here. So now this applies when the button's in the hover state. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use these 2 color properties here. And I can do that because this button has those colors. Even though this is the hover, it's still a button, so it's going to inherit these 2 colors. It's going to have access to them. They're in the scope of button, so to speak, okay? So what I'll do is I'll just invert these, right? So I'm going to say color is now going to be -- color background, right? So instead of white, we'll change to blue for the text, and then the background color will change to the foreground color. So I'm going to change this to color foreground, and let's try it again. So if I hover over it, you can see that it inverts, right? The border is missing though, so let's set the border color also, right? I'm going to change this one right here to, or I'm going to add here, border color. And on this, I don't want the border color to change, so I'm going to make sure that it stays that way, right? Oh, actually, you know what? I don't even need to do this. You know what? I made a mistake here because I just realized I'm not getting the border showing up because I haven't given it a width. I've given it a style and a color, so it should actually keep this foreground color, right? Or actually, you know what I should do is I should just make the background color here, and then I won't need to set it down below, but I should also set the border width, right? That's my mistake. Let's make this like 2 pixels, right? Okay, so now I keep the border, right? And then, so again, let's go over this, right? I've got 2 variables here that set the foreground and the background color. There's two colors involved with my button, and these colors are defined in the scope of the button selector. So that means anything that's using the button selector as its scope is going to inherit these two colors. So that means I can use the colors here without having to redefine them, okay? What else here? Oh yeah, let's add a little bit of a transition. So I'm gonna say transition 200 milliseconds, and then that'll make the change happen it'll kind of fade in and fade out, right? Okay, so this looks pretty good, but it's not that big a change as before, but this actually adds a few like secret features that we can draw on, right? Since the foreground and background color here are defined, when we create a new button, we can just redefine those or that color variable to change the color of the button. So for example, like if someone wanted to use the button, but they're like, this blue color isn't quite right, I need a green button. They could change the color by just setting the value for the foreground color property or the background color property. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to say, I'm going to add a style prop or a style attribute, right? And then in the style attribute, I'm going to redefine one of my properties here, okay? And then the rest of the button will read that change. So I'm going to set color to be color background colon to be let's actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cheat. I'm going to say color green, and then I'm going to actually just pick the color here. I want to make this, that's a little too bright. Let's maybe like that, right? Actually, let me change that to the hex color, right? I just did that so I could get the color picker, and then I'm going to delete this, right? Because you can't get it inside here because it's a string, right? So I'll put my color here like this. Let me move that to another line so it'll be a little easier to read. So you can see here, I'm going to redefine the background color, give it a new value, and then both the hover state and the regular state of the button uses that background color, right? So imagine this, like if you had a project that you were working on and you needed to define a button that was used throughout the project and it had a standard look, you could define it like we did just now. And then if there was any location where you needed to identify a particular button that needed to look a little bit different, then you could easily change that button by just setting a style on it, okay? Like that's pretty easy and it's very customizable, right? And we can take this even further. Imagine that, let's make another button just for fun, right? So imagine like, for this one, imagine that the background here was a dark color. So what I want to do is I actually want to have dark text on my button, right? So in this case, if I make a foo button here and I decide like, actually, I don't want to change the foreground color, I want to change the background, or instead of the background color, I want to change the foreground color, right? So maybe I could make this black, and now I have a black button, right, with a blue highlight color. Okay, so I could change both the foreground and the background. You could change both of these colors if you want. Here's another idea. While we're here, why don't we make a red button, right? So oftentimes you'll have a button that's kind of got some dangerous, feature to it, like delete, and you don't want to make it blue. People might click it by accident, so you want to make it red, Oops, actually that's the foreground. Let's make this the background color. And again, we never use the base value red. We always use some customized red value. So I think what I'm going to do is cheat again and put this here and get the color picker and change it, right? So maybe I'll make it maybe like that, right? I think that looks okay. So let's get that, and then we can delete this out of here, right? Because I don't want to redefine that property there. I just want to get the hex value there, right? Okay, there we go. So that's kind of a good button. So I got a red one. Now imagine also that your framework or your CSS library or your base CSS code defines a bunch of color values, right? So it has a primary color, an info color, and some other colors. And you don't want to remember what these hex values are, right? So you noticed I had some trouble. I had to try and use the picker to generate these hex values. It was kind of a hassle. If I had the named color values, I could pull those up, right? So let's experiment with that. So imagine that you had some color values here defined on the root element, right? So I have a color. I'm going to call this color A. And maybe I need kind of a purple color, so maybe I'll just start with black here, and then I'll make a purple color out of this, right? Something like that. And I want to use this color, right? So if I have a color that's defined on the root element, then down here inside my button, instead of using the hex color, actually let's just copy this one and make a new one. We'll make a brand new button here, and let's make the bar button, right? And instead of using this color, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use var. Now we always have to use var when we want to get the value from a variable. So I'm going to say var, and then I'll choose color A, and then it double does up for me. There we go, right? Okay, and then I'll use color A. So now I'm just pulling a color by name out of my default colors that I've defined, right? So this, like, think about this for a little bit, because this is a very powerful idea, right? You have a style, and that style, or that, the selector for that style defines some variables in the scope of that selector. And these variables right here are live, so they act like while the program is running. You could set them with JavaScript, right? And then while you're writing your HTML, you can easily just redefine a color variable as part of an element to give that element a custom style, okay? So anyway, thanks for watching, and in the next video, what we're going to do is we're going to take this idea a little bit further and maybe compare it to Sass variables and talk about how the Sass variables might come into play with this, right? Okay, so again, thanks for watching and have a great day.